Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. Today we're going to be looking at a new feature in Snap which is MaxDiff. This will cover a bit about what it is, the thinking behind it, how to build a MaxDiff question, and then what to do with the resulting data. And MaxDiff really is all about getting that usable, actionable data. Before we get into the software, let's have a quick look at what MaxDiff actually is. First off, you may hear a few different terms being bandied about: MaxDiff, maximum difference scaling, and best worst scaling, but it's all referring to the same thing. It's a question technique that forces an opinion, but does so in a nice way. You don't have the dreaded must answer markers, it's more a case of gently probing to get an opinion. An item will be presented to a respondent multiple times. Each time it's presented, it will be shown alongside a set of additional items, with those additional items changing each time it's seen. So you will see that item a few times, but you're going to be asked to consider it in relation to a few different things each time. In terms of its use in the real world, often MaxDiff is used when you're looking to develop a product or service. So you want to find out what's important to people, and more importantly, you want those things put in a meaningful order. So why use MaxDiff and not just stick with a more recognised rating scale or ranking question? In short, standard rating and ranking questions have got issues. There can be a lack of discrimination, and individual respondents can have different biases towards them. I'll be explaining a little bit more about those two things in just a bit. But MaxDiff is arguably also easier for the respondent to use, as they're comparing a few items or options at once rather than trying to mentally juggle a large array of options all at the same time. This makes it especially beneficial if you're talking to children or perhaps people with learning difficulties. Let's go back and have a look at a couple of things that I've just been mentioning, the first being something called lack of discrimination. This is in relation to the data that you're going to be getting back. Quite often we get what's known as straight lining, with respondents largely just ticking boxes of a similar nature, and this is compounded by people tending to want to agree. In my example on the right, which can be quite typical, there are a couple of answers which seem to have stoked up a bit of opinion, but largely the answers are all positive. We then have a lot of categories which are then all tied for first place, or more likely you do have a first, second, third, fourth place, etc, but the difference between them is so marginal that it's difficult to tell if an item is truly more desirable than another. Yes, it might be a few percentage points higher than another, but is that really enough to make a business decision on? We then have something called scale use bias to contend with. This goes back to me saying that people tend to want to agree. Some people, and even within some cultures, it is more popular or more the done thing to err on the side of positivity. Some will want to be in agreement with an interviewer and won't want to come across negatively. Others, of course, will be the opposite and be quite comfortable being combative. The combination of this makes it quite difficult to do cross-cultural research and analysis. Okay, let's head into the software to see it all working in real life. I'm going to be using two main surveys to demonstrate today's feature. One is a bit of a silly example, but it does hopefully make it really obvious what's happening during the live interview, and that's the fruit survey. And then I have one which is perhaps a bit more realistic, which I'll then use once we've got our head around things. Both of them have got some sample data in there already to help me demonstrate the analysis side a bit later. I'll begin with the fruit survey. As you can see, I have a set of grid questions, so 8 different categories in total, and then I have 2 answers, so best and worst, or favourite and least favourite. As I said, this is a bit of a silly example, and as you can see, I've included chips as one of my answers. Now, clearly that's not a fruit, but that will hopefully help it stand out a little bit later when I'm demonstrating this as a live survey. Below that, I then have 2 additional questions and a page break, just to make it a little bit more of a realistic survey. Now, the idea behind MaxDiff is that a respondent will see this grid question, but they're going to see it in a slightly different setup, with each of the options being put up against a selection of the remaining options. So they will be asked to evaluate pairs, but not in comparison to all 7 other options, but in comparison to perhaps 3 or 4 different options. but then later on they'll be asked to evaluate pairs again, but this time against a different set of options. How many times they see pairs and how many alternatives there are is down to the survey designer, and that's set in the variable properties of that question. In fact, it's the variable properties of the grid first question, which in my case is pairs. So if I right click and go to variable properties, and you can see I've got MaxDiff, which is a new option there. I've got this set up already, but I can just click on the ... and then we can look at the different options in there. The item count is just a number of sub-questions in this grid. So in my case, I've got 8 different fruits. Items per set is the number of fruits that I want to see at any one time. So today I've specified that I want pairs to be seen alongside an additional 3 fruits. So 4 fruits in total. Appearance per item is the number of times I want each item to be seen. So today I've said that I want to see pairs 3 times in total. Snap will then look at the above information and work out how many sets of fruit will need to be seen in order to ensure that each of those fruits is seen at least 3 times. So today we will see 6 versions of question 1, with each version asking us to compare 4 different fruits, and over those 6 sets we will see pairs 3 times. Okay, let's have a look at this survey in action. You can see question 1 is displayed, and as we stated, we have our 4 different options. Now, I've set this up as a must answer question, so if I do try and move on, it won't let me. Like a ratings check question, I'm only able to choose one as my favourite and one as my least favourite, and equally what I can't do is say that pairs is my favourite and least favourite. So let's go through and complete this survey. So I'm going to say that bananas is my favourite and melon is my least favourite. This is the first time that we've seen chips. Press next. So this is set 2. So we're going to say, I'm going to say that grapes is my least favourite and cherries are my favourite. So that's set number 2. This is set number 3. Bananas is my favourite, grapes are my least favourite. Set number 4, we have chips again, so chips for the second time. Set number 5. And then hopefully set number 6, and that we have chips, which is the third time we've seen chips. So let's go with mango and melon. And as you can see, that was the last of the sets. So we had 6 sets and we did see chips 3 times, and each time we saw an item, it was alongside 3 additional items. So I'll just go ahead and submit that one. Okay, so the data is submitted. Let's head back to desktop and see how the data has been captured and how it can be charted. I'll close down the design window and let's synchronize the data. If you remember, I already had 4 cases in here, so I've now just added that new case. So I've now got a total of 5 cases. And I've already got a number of tables and charts set up. So let's start off with AN1. So if I go into the properties of this question, initially this is just looking at question 1A through to question 1H, and we're just looking at the counts to begin with. Now, we have got 5 cases today, but as you can see, we've got a total of 30 against each item. And that's because over those 6 sets, each item's been seen 3 times by the 5 people, which is 15. And equally, over those 6 sets, each item was not seen 3 times by those 5 people. So that's another 15. So that's why we've got 15 actual responses and 15 effectively not asked. So in the case of pairs, over those 15 times that it was seen, it was chosen as best twice, it was chosen as worst once, and 12 times it wasn't chosen at all. So it was seen, but it wasn't selected as best or worst. So those times count as no replies, but they're different from the normal no replies that you might see in the standard questions. These aren't people that just couldn't be bothered to select that answer. They were people who decided that other options were more relevant. Likewise, we have 15 not asked. Once again, these are different to what you might class as a normal not asked, where routing skipped over a question. They're not asked in that they just didn't appear in that particular set at this time. Now, That is all very confusing, but the good news is that you don't need to worry about any of this on this page at the moment. I just wanted to highlight that in a MaxDiff question, you have some no replies and some not asks, but Snap's going to be dealing with all that for you in the background. And you wouldn't really want to look at this table. In fact, you don't even need to build this table, but it was more just to sort of give you an indication of what's going on. So for the time being, let's just pretend that this data or this table doesn't really exist. If I open up AN2, we can then look at the actual MaxDiff analysis that's going to be used to build some nice looking charts in just a moment. So again, if I go into the properties, as before, we are looking at just Q1A to Q1H, and you can see that we have the score and the score percentage, and these are turned on in the summary statistics tab. So these are new options. And we are making use of something called MaxDiff, and that's just a weight, which I'll be looking at in just a moment, which is going to then be used to create these scoring systems. If we go and look at MaxDiff, the weight, this weight is built into our templates. Worth noting that if you are using a survey which was built quite a while ago, it may well not have this weight in there, but you can certainly go ahead and create that yourself. And of course, if you're using your own templates, you're almost certainly not going to have that weight in there. So yeah, it's very easy to recreate, but these are all the weights which come built into Snap by default. So based on a sort of a 3-point scale, a 5-point scale, a 10-point scale, etc. But if we go into this MaxDiff one, effectively anyone who has chosen something as the best is going to get 1 point. Any items which has been chosen as worst is going to get -1 point. Obviously, in our example earlier, we also had another 2 items which weren't best or worst, so they're just going to get ignored. So if we now take a look at these 2 previous tables, we can see how the calculations are taking place. So if we stick with pairs, so 2 people chose best, or pairs was chosen as best twice, should I say. So 2 lots of 1 point is 2 points, but we've also had 1 person said it was worse, so that gets a -1. So effectively 2 minus 1 is 1. If we then look at bananas, so we had 10 lots of 1, so that's 10 points. And then we also had 2 lots of -2, which is -2. So basically 10 minus 2 is 8. So that's the score, which may well be useful, but normally MaxDiff analysis is presented as a score percentage. And as I said, that was included in this chart or in this table just by turning on the score percentage. So the score percentage takes into account the score, and it's divided by the number of times that that option was asked, or the number of times that that option was seen. So just to confirm, each item was seen 15 times because it was selected 2 times and selected the 3rd time. It was also seen but not selected 12 times. So 12 plus 2 plus 1 is 15. So 1 divided by 15 is 7. Now, as I said, I have perhaps made this all sound a little bit more complicated than it needs to be by showing you all these tables, but to confirm, you don't need to look at these tables or indeed even create these tables. I was more just trying to give you an indication of what's going on in the background. So arguably, forget all that and let's jump straight to what you really want, which is a nice looking chart which tells a story. So if I close these ones down, and instead we're going to open up AN31. Go into the properties of that one. Again, we're just looking at Q1A to Q1H. This time we're only turning on the score percentage because we don't actually need the score, but the score percentage is again making use of MaxDiff, and we're making use of a brand new question style or chart style called MaxDiff Analysis Horizontal Transposed. And just remembering that the strange names are there to help you, so it says transposed, so we have the transpose ticked. So here we have the different scores with the positive data heading in one direction and the negative data in the opposite direction. The only other thing I've done is sort this chart by the score percentage. So if I was to put it back to the default, it's just in the original order that the survey was set up, but certainly more common to sort your data top to bottom. If we have a quick look at AN 4.1, it's doing exactly the same, but this time the chart style just doesn't include the word horizontal. So as you can see, the data is going up and down rather than across the page. So that was a simple example to hopefully give you some background workings to make you understand the logic that is happening before, during and after. I'm now going to pop into a more realistic example which might help you imagine how you might make use of MaxDiff within your projects. So this time we have a survey about a streaming platform, and it has 25 completed cases this time. Now, a couple of things just to consider when setting up your MaxDiff questions. As the survey designer, of course, you understand how this is working in terms of the sort of looping of the different options. But put yourself in the shoes of the respondent, and they're likely to be thinking something along the lines of, haven't I already completed this survey? Or when on earth is this going to end? So consider how many loops or sets that you're going to be putting people through. The more times that you want an item to be seen, and the fewer items you want to be seen each time, the more sets you're going to end up with. So in my case today, I want 4 items to be seen each time as before, and I want each item to be seen 3 times. But because I've now got 1 extra item, I've got 9 items rather than the 8 we had earlier, we actually need 6.75 sets. Now, obviously what we can't have is 6 3/4 sets, so what Snap's done is round that up to 7 for me. Now, just to confirm, Snap will always round up. If it rounded down, so let's pretend it was actually 6.2, and it rounded down to 6 sets, it means that actually some of these items won't be seen 3 times. So instead, Snap will always round that up to ensure that each item will be seen at least 3 times. It does mean that some of these items might be seen 4 times, but we won't ever have any items being only shown twice. And I guess it comes down to being realistic. I'm sure you've heard the saying about questionnaire design with only including questions that you're actually going to analyse and make use of. So don't add questions just for the sake of it, basically. If you aren't going to actually use that data, get rid of it. And the same goes with MaxDiff options. If you aren't willing to then act on those options, don't include them. So in my example, wouldn't it be amazing if the service provider could provide a 4D experience with perhaps taste and smell? But that's simply not going to happen in a home setup for many, many, many years, if not ever. So why include that as an option to begin with, as you're only going to make the number of sets increase and probably going to frustrate the respondent. But whatever you decide, what I would suggest is it's a good idea to give some instructions to the person filling in this survey. So you can see I've added a little note at the top just to let them know that you're going to see variations of this type of question with options being seen multiple times. So let's run through this survey live to see it in action. So again, we have our 4 different options. And just to remind you a little bit about why we're using MaxDiff, if you ask someone on a scale of 1 to 5 if price is important to them, they're almost certainly going to say 5. Ask them about price in comparison to 3 or 4 items, and it still might be their most important thing to them. But now ask them to consider price against 3 different things, and it may well end up playing second fiddle to one of those things. So in this case, I'm going to say that yes, perhaps price is the most important. Maybe brand name, I don't really care about that. Okay, let's just do usability and app version. So let's stick with price again and reputation. But now we've got price and usability, I might say, well, actually, usability trumps that. So we'll go with usability as my most important. It's not to say that price is suddenly jumping down to the bottom, but it's certainly not top. So I'm now going to say the bottom is the app version. So again, I'll just go through, giving some responses. As I said, we've actually got 7 loops happening this time. And then I've just got a couple of questions at the end. And quite a nice sort of layout. You can see I've spent far too long watching television, so I've got lots of streaming services. So just going back to that price example, remember what this is all about is trying to get to the bottom of what people really think when they're taking time to consider an item in comparison to other items. So let's go back and have a look at the data on this particular survey. So as I said, this time I have 25 cases, and as before, I've got 2 charts. So let's look at AN 3.1. So as before, we've got the sort of positive data going in one direction, the negative data going in the other direction. So as I said, yes, price is important, but actually usability trumps that. And again, if we look at the one going across the page, the same data, just in a slightly different layout. But if we now take a look at a survey which is using a more traditional rating scale question, and we'll see how the data compares. So I've got a similar survey, again with 25 cases, but if I open up this one, so this is just a standard grid question asking people to rate each of these items on a scale of 1 for not very important through to 5 very important. And as we talked about earlier, it's quite likely we're going to have a fair amount of straight lining, with a lot of people just going straight down here and choosing option number 5, maybe occasionally choosing 4s and 3s, but generally probably sticking with the positive options. So again, let's have a look at the data for that. So if we look at AN3, so very clear to see that usability is at the top. And it does look like customer service is also fairly up there, and we've got all these other options which are doing fairly well until we get to app version. If we look at the data in a different way though, looking at a scoring system, then again we can still clearly see that there is a number 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 all the way down to number 9, but actually there's not a huge amount of difference between those. So we can see our top option, which is usability, has a score of 5, but even if we come down to the 5th option of reputation, that's 4.5, so 4.5, so less than half a point between 5th position and top position. In fact, even coming down to number 7, we've got 0.7% difference. And as I mentioned at the start, is a difference of half a point really enough to make a decision on? MaxDiff is all about gently forcing people to make a firm choice that will then give greater insight and transparency during analysis. So hopefully that's given you a good overview of what MaxDiff is and how it can be used to drive your decision making across your projects. To recap the benefits of using MaxDiff over standard rating and ranking questions, it gives you good discrimination, meaning that we're not faced with straight lining of your answers. Because of this, we can get more precision in our data using a smaller data set of respondents. We aren't faced with regional or cultural differences in the inherent way that people answer questions, and as the respondent is only ever trading off one option against a handful of other options, it's easier to complete, making it ideal if interviewing children or anyone that might have cognitive learning difficulties. And the big one, we get clear, actionable data at the end, leading to informed decision making. And at the end of the day, that's the holy grail of what we're all after. On screen now are a couple of QR codes which you might find useful. The first one will take you off to our support hub page for building a MaxDiff project. In the middle is a link off to a recent webinar I did based around building charts in Snap. Would certainly recommend taking a look at that if you're new to the analysis side of things. On our support hub, you can also find many other webinars covering a whole raft of topics. If you have got a spare 2 minutes, I'd be grateful if you'd complete our short survey about today's webinar. That can be accessed via the QR code on the right, or you can find it in the chat of this Teams call. You will receive an email in the next day or so, which will include links off to all these resources, as well as the feedback form and a recording of today's session. Thank you for joining me, and we will hopefully see you again soon.